underway here at the Glenn Show. I'm Glenn Loury. I teach at Brown University, professor of economics there. I'm host of the Glenn Show, which can be found at glennloury.substack.com and at YouTube.com/C/Glenn Loury Show. And I'm with Lawrence Kotlikoff. Larry is professor of economics at Boston University, an old friend of mine, dear good friend of mine, outstanding economist, and frequent guest here at the Glenn Show, where we talk about economic policy issues, amongst other things. So welcome back, Larry.
I was your best man, and I was your boss for a while. I hired you to BU. You stayed at BU for a bit with us.
Professors don't have bosses, Larry.
Yeah, I'm a pretend boss. Nobody's going to control Glenn Loury. He does what he.
Larry is an old dear friend. We've been friends for a long time. I joined the BU faculty in 1991. That's going to be exactly 30 years ago.
Yeah.
As a professor, Larry helped to recruit me with John Silber's support, the late John Silber, former president of Boston University, away from Harvard, where I was ensconced as a tenured professor at the Kennedy School. But they persuaded me to walk across the river. I have no regrets, none whatsoever. Had 14 good years in the economics department at Boston University. And yes, Larry presided very effectively as best man at my recent wedding 4 years ago to the lovely LaJuan Loury, my wife and life partner. She's not here to show herself. She sometimes makes cameo appearances.
She does. Okay, tell her to come in. Give you some.
No, I don't think I'm going to do that. She's off in another part of this house doing something.
Okay.
But yeah, Larry and we're fellow economists, and both of us are public intellectuals after a fashion. Larry has columns in Forbes and other places where economic policy issues are being debated. He has written popular books about everything from Social Security to the future of banking in this country. Larry and I had some scintillating conversations around the time of the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, and have been talking economics together at the Glenn Show ever since. And we're back because, inflation is knocking at the door. Isn't that the economic story of the day, Larry?
Yeah, it's running around 6% a year. That's huge compared to anything we've seen in 30 years. It's the highest number in 30 years. And so, if you think about it, if you've got money in a checking account, a lot of people are worried about the stock market, so they're just holding cash. Well, 6% means that the real value of their money, their checking account, goes down 6%. It means it buys 6% fewer hot dogs and lamps and pays 6% less real rent. So this is a real hit. It's a real tax. And I think we need to understand this as part of the fiscal operation of the country, that the country is running a fiscal policy that isn't coming up with enough tax revenue to cover its spending short-term, let alone long-term. And consequently, it's printing money. We don't quite know how much, so that's something we should talk about. But you see countries that are in fiscal trouble print money, and then their prices rise. And yeah, we have supply chain kind of explanations, but there's some major concern about this inflation being a bigger deal than just short-term supply bottlenecks.
Okay, 6% is not high relative to some historical experience in the U.S. We would go back 40 years when you were a young economic staffer at the Council for Economic Advisors in the Reagan administration.
Right.
Inflation was running a lot higher than 6% when Jimmy Carter left office, wasn't it?
Yeah, it got up to around 10%. Just to be clear to all your listeners, I'm not a Republican or Democrat. I didn't actually vote for President Reagan. I was happy to help work for the country. But
no one said you belong to any party. I just said you work for the government.
Yeah, most people think if a guy works for Reagan, he must be a long-term Republican.
We don't want to paint you with the brush that you don't want to be painted with. But I mean, people should understand 10% inflation per year. Half your money is gone in about 4 years?
Yeah, because it's compounding. It's 1.1 times 1.1 times
4.5 years. Half your money is gone. Yeah. At 10%, at 6%, it might take 6 or 7 years, but half your money will be gone.
Yeah,
in a blink of an eye.
Yeah, so it's a very big thing. People on think about Detroit, like firemen or policemen, where Detroit went bankrupt and they had to settle the teachers. I don't know all the facts about that what happened in that settlement. But my understanding is that their pensions were cut, but then they're fixed in nominal terms. So they're just in dollars. So if you have 6% inflation, that means that unless I have this wrong, the retired firemen and policemen and teachers in Detroit suffered a 6% hit. Their living standard dropped 6%, in terms of what their pension could buy in 1 year.
Well, it depends on whether their benefit is indexed, right? If they've got an indexed defined benefit pension plan, then they'll adjust the payments for inflation.
Well, that's used to be the case thing, but not for this Detroit, not for a city that's broke, not, that went through bankruptcy and came out with a settlement. And what we're talking about, there's lots of companies that have gone belly up and where their pensions have been transformed into something less than they were promised and are fixed just in dollars. I think about Detroit airline pilots. After Detroit went through a bankruptcy and their pension was taken over by the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which I think was paying like 40 cents on the dollar. That's the kind of thing we have to really understand, and we haven't really done a careful study. And I'm working on this as a research project to understand who gets hurt and by how much when you have unexpected inflation.
Okay, let me just clarify to my own thinking, which is that there's a difference between a bankrupt pension plan that has made commitments that it's not able to meet simply because it's not bringing in enough revenue to cover the commitments, as perhaps might have been the case for the city of Detroit, and a pension plan whose value is being eroded by rising price levels when the benefits are fixed in nominal terms. That's a distinction we don't want to lose track of. Right? I mean, the state of Illinois is going bankrupt not because of the high inflation, but because they've made so many promises to retired public employees that they're just not able to raise enough taxes to cover the obligations. Yeah,
I think first of all, there aren't that many people anymore retiring with pensions, and the ones that are, the fraction that are retiring with pensions that are inflation indexed, that are adjusted every year for inflation, I think is quite small. And then, of course, the ones who are getting pensions coming out of a bankruptcy, I think they're for sure nominal. They're not inflation indexed. So this is a real issue for people in real lives. Some people's wages are going up and keeping even with inflation. So there's a lot of redistribution arising from inflation. And I think a lot of people say that there have been articles that the government spending is the cause of this, so that the bottlenecks are the cause of this. But we've had a history of, we don't know for sure what exactly is the cause of this. How much of it's bottlenecks, how much of it is pent-up demand, how much of it is the government's just been printing so much money to pay for its bills, not just now, but for decades. So it's complicated. It's not a simple thing that you can kind of sit down and say, well, this is the reason for this price increase. Had the government just not done that, we would not have the inflation.
Okay, well, one question is this a transitory blip, or have we entered in a new or different era? Well,
that's also an interesting question, because part of, I think, what inflation is about is there being a multiple equilibrium, multiple paths the economy can take with respect to inflation. If everybody gets it into the mind that inflation is taking off, if they get that expectation, then if I've got a company, I'm going to start raising my prices because I know I got to keep my workers and I got to give them a higher raise. And then some other company sees me raising my prices and they raise their prices, and then say, well, I've got to keep up with them, and they're trying to keep it. So it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, where people's expectations of more inflation or inflation accelerating take over. And if you look at the hyperinflations we had in the last century, we had 22 hyperinflations. Each of those countries had fiscal problems out the wazoo. They were really, like the Weimar Republic, where people were being paid at lunchtime with wheelbarrows full of money. That for sure, that's the government printing money. But even if you look at that hyperinflation, the price level rose at a much more rapid clip than the increase in the printing of money, than the money was being printed. So let's say the government's printing, just to give a very simple example, doubling the amount of money in the economy over the course of the week, but prices are going up not by a factor of 2, but by a factor of 5. That's because people are expecting prices to go up even faster, and they're turning money into a hot potato. They don't want to hold the money, because if by the end of the week, if they're worried that prices are going to, going crazy and they say, gee, I don't want to hold this money, I'm going to run to the store and use it. So now we have faster money is really equivalent to more money in our basic economic theory. That's what's called the velocity.
Let me share with the readers this famous formula: MV equals PQ.
Right.
Money times the velocity of money, the monetary stock times the velocity, equals the price level times the quantity of goods that are being transacted. And you're just pointing out that a given monetary base can be more inflationary if people anticipate that tomorrow's money will be worth less and rush out to spend the day, which will increase the velocity with which money is being exchanged for goods.
It becomes a hot potato, and that's the V in that formula. If M goes up by a certain percentage, but V is going up by a much bigger percentage, then for a given Y, which is the output, P can go up much more due to the V than due to the M increasing. And
now, what's the evidence to your mind that this kind of expectations-driven self-fulfilling prophecy is playing out amongst us now?
Well, I don't know. I worry about this. I worry that that people start understanding that that they start forming expectations. Think about the Weimar Republic. Nobody knew during that hyperinflation exactly how much M was going up. So they had to form judgments about how much is M going up, and therefore how fast should they run to the store to get rid of their money? How fast should they make V go up? Or think about Argentina that has had periods in recent decades where the government would be reporting information about how much money they were printing, which nobody believed. So it was like there's no anchor in that context. People could say, well, maybe the government's tripling the money supply today, just overnight. So people are setting prices in Argentina based on the exchange rate. The exchange rate was just being driven by expectations. So there's no kind of there's no anchor. That's when things can come unleashed.
Am I naive to think that whereas Weimar Germany or Argentina of more recent times might have had monetary policies which were not transparent, we here in the United States of America can see the books of the Federal Reserve and know exactly what the monetary policy of the government has been, and therefore are not as much in the dark about how M is changing as people may have been in those examples you were citing?
Well, this is where I wanted to get into this discussion with you, because, the MV equals PY formula, that's the quantity theory that a lot of kids learned in introductory economics, a lot of your viewers. That's a static framework, but we live in an economy that's intertemporal, dynamic, going through time. So the government could print more money today and, let's say, print a lot of money and buy a lot of airplanes for the Air Force, okay? And then 5 years from now, they could take in a lot of money by a big tax increase. So just think about the amount of money out there in the economy, not at a point in time, but kind of through time. So we might have a big increase now, but a big decrease in the future. If people think, well, the Fed is going to be adjusting, maybe they'll kind of overdo it this year, but in the future they're going to underdo it, so that through time we're going to have a reasonable path of the of the money supply, then you've got even more uncertainty about this whole process. And what the Fed's up to is partly working with the Treasury just to print money to buy lunch for the president. But part of what it's doing, which makes this very complicated to see what's going on from the numbers, even if you can, we can trust our government's numbers, is that the Fed is engaging in financial transactions. So let's say I'm the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, and I take $1 billion and I buy some Tesla stock, just suppose it, some security or some bond, Tesla bond. So I'm printing money, I'm buying this asset. I'm printing $1 billion of green piece of paper, putting them out into the economy. We got more money chasing the same amount of goods, we kind of think in the Ec 101 concept. And I've taken back this asset. So now the Fed has added to the money supply. But Powell can say, and everybody else can say or think, well, in 3 years, I'm going to take that Tesla stock or those Tesla bonds and sell them back into the market and take the money back out. So the Fed's engaged in these portfolio transactions at the same time as just printing money for the president's lunch. And we can't really tell from the Fed's balance sheet because it's very complicated to understand. You really can't necessarily break it out. How much of this is pure, paying for the government's bills by printing money, because it might be doing some of that now, but less of it in the future. So it's a whole intertemporal path of policy. But the one thing that you can be assured of is if you have a projection of a path of fiscal policy, taxes and outlays that don't match up, which is our country's situation, then you know that through time, this path has got to be one where there's a lot of printing of money to pay for the government's bills. And I think the public may be understanding that. I mean, I've been talking about this, trying to point this out for decades now. I've written books called The Clash of Generations, The Coming Generational Storm. The fact that our long-term finances are leaving enormous bills for our kids. And when when we have inflation, we get hurt. We just talked about the fact that somebody got a checking account or a pension lost 6% this year. Who's getting helped? If we're getting hurt, the public's getting hurt, it's the government that's getting helped. This is really what's called the seniorage tax, the inflation tax. And so I think there's going to be a strong tendency of countries that are broke through time to try and rely on the seniorage tax until they realize that all they're doing is producing inflation. The economy gets used to high inflation, and that's very destructive to the economy ultimately in terms of.
Okay, let me slow you down a bit. Let's get just very basic.
Okay, maybe I've been a little bit too.
Your example of the Federal Reserve buying some shares of Tesla stock and putting money into the economy. Now, naively, I'm thinking, okay, that stock had to be bought from somebody who was holding Tesla stock as an asset. They weren't spending it on goods. They were holding the stock as an asset. Now they've got money as an asset. It doesn't mean they're going to spend that on goods. They might turn around and invest that money in some other asset. How is it necessarily inflationary for the Federal Reserve to purchase shares of Tesla stock?
Well, the idea is that the money, the theory, like a Milton Friedman would be saying, is that unlike Tesla stock, money is being used in transactions. So it has a special role in impacting the price level. And that's why money is, it's M times V equals P times Y. There's M in that equation, not Tesla stock. So because it's being used for transactions, and it makes people be able to spend more rapidly. But you're right. We don't have. That's a very important question, and Friedman might have had it basically wrong, insofar as people could be taking in this money and swapping it for Tesla stock and just holding it, right? How does that affect any of their transactions? It doesn't. But if they get into their mind that, gee, I better dump this, the prices are rising, I better go buy some furniture from IKEA because that's going to retain its value, they can do that really quickly. And maybe they, whereas maybe they're more reluctant to try and cash out their Tesla stock, and they can't collectively do that. They can sell it to each other, but in the end.
Okay. Another question just to clarify. So you're using this metaphor, print money to pay for the president's lunch, which, as I understand it, means underwrite the cost of President Biden's, Build Back Better program by engaging in activities at the Federal Reserve that have the consequence of causing the money supply to increase. Presumably, there's not literally a printing press, greenbacks, and money falling out of helicopters on people. Can you just explain explicitly what the institutional processes are that translate? Because the president is telling everybody his expenditure plans are, quote unquote, paid for. He says everything is paid for. Is he lying to us? What's going on? Can you break down the process by which budgetary finance at the federal level in the trillions translates into more money circulating around and therefore possibly more inflation?
Okay, so there's kind of two questions there. One is how does this kind of process work? And then, or how might it work where we pay for the president's lunch or whatever, or Build Back Better? And then how much is Build Back Better adding to inflationary pressures or to new spending? But so, suppose that they wanted to extend child tax credits to poor households with kids for a couple more years as part of this bill, or to subsidize electric car purchases. So the Treasury needs to send out, let's say, a subsidy check or a tax credit check. And what the Treasury might do is print up an orange piece of paper, go to you, Glenn, and borrow the money, and then use that money to give it to a poor person as a child tax credit. Now, you're holding an orange piece of paper. The Fed can electronically print money and come and buy your orange federal Treasury bond. And if you look through that whole process, the money I took from you when I gave you I gave you an orange piece of paper, you gave me some green paper. I took the green paper I bought, I gave it to somebody else. And then the Fed printed up some new green paper, gave it to you in exchange for the orange paper. If you look through that, in the end, the Fed's holding the orange piece of paper. It started with the Treasury, but there's more money out there in the hands of that poor person. And so this is just printing money to pay for this social program. Now, Biden, his economist would say, in his defense, that first of all, we have taxes that we are raising as part of this bill to cover these costs, and I would have to look more closely. He'd also might say that if we give these poor households a better chance for their kids in life, that 20 years from now, they're going to be more productive. Therefore, our economy will be bigger. And if Y is bigger for the same M and V, the P will be lower. So it's a dynamic process. This is investment in human capital, not in physical capital, not in infrastructure. And he might be right. So spending in the short run, if you're spending wisely, might be more like an investment than, even though it seems like it's just a giveaway. If we're investing, let's say, in somebody's healthcare, they want to expand Medicaid in the 13 or so states which haven't expanded Medicaid up to the Obamacare limit. So they're saying, well, gee, if we can get these people in front of their GPs so they have annual checkups, we might prevent permanent disabilities that they might otherwise end up with, right? So that's the sense in which this thing is not an easy thing to think about. But when you do look at the Congressional Budget Office's projections, and not just under Biden, but Trump and Bush and Carter and Clinton, and go back. If you look at the long run projections of taxes and outlays, you see things getting worse. That the fiscal gap, the present value, the value in the present of all those outlays, take all those outlays, add them up in the way economists do, which is take, some dollar in the future is not necessarily worth the same as the dollar today, because you could invest in the economy and it would grow to a higher through time. So, but take the value in the present of all those future outlays, take the value in the present of all the future receipts, look at the difference, that's the fiscal gap. As a share of GDP, that's the highest ratio of any country in the developed world. We're in the worst fiscal shape, and other countries have done this calculation, and I do this calculation every year using the CBO numbers. Nobody in our government does it. The European Union does it for every European Union member every 3 years on an official basis. So,
okay, again, I want to slow you down because there's just so much coming out here. First of all, I think your argument that Build Back Better might actually not be as budgetary harmful as one might think because it enhances productivity seems to assume that the dollars invested by the government in, let's say, healthcare have a higher return than those dollars invested in the private sector would have had they not been taxed away. I don't know how you know that that's true.
I don't know.
Secondly, I just wanted to observe you didn't mention Obama in that list of presidents, and if I'm not mistaken, the outstanding national debt doubled under his tenure, didn't it?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's an omission. Didn't mean any slight to Obama. I have a lot of respect for him for the job he did.
Well, what I said was correct.
Yeah. But let me just point out, if you think about this infrastructure bill, they have these big price tag numbers. People think about, $2 trillion infrastructure bill. I think that's what it ended up as. I think it started out originally, it was going to be $3 trillion. But if you look at the new spending, these bills always include kind of renewed spending, like maintenance of highways that we've been doing every year after year. But so if you ask, what is the new spending on this 10-year bill? And I just read an article by Steve Radner just the other day in the New York Times. The only thing I really got out of it were the numbers, because I thought his analysis was very naive and indicative of somebody who wasn't thinking very deeply or understanding very deeply this whole process. Okay. The same thing with Larry Summers. I think these guys are jumping on the bandwagon. We see inflation. These guys are now the inflation hawks.
Wait a minute, Larry Summers is the bandwagon. It's people jumping on him. He's the former secretary of the Treasury.
Well, he's
et cetera. But anyway,
I came out and said, recently we're going to have much higher inflation. Then Radner writes this thing. I predicted inflation was going to be higher, and therefore aren't I smart? But
you would distinguish between Radner and Summers, right? I mean, Summers is a real economist. Well, I'm asking.
I don't know. When I read his stuff, I'm not reading a real economist. I'm not reading real economics. I'm reading a politician, in my view, to tell you the truth. I don't think
duly noted.
Radner is a protege of Summers. They all sound the same. He's got a whole list of proteges who worked in the council under Obama, under Clinton, entire coterie that sound just the same, and I think are mistaken on the same basis. But one interesting thing in Radner's article, which is a fact, not any diagnosis, was that he said the new spending on infrastructure in this bill is something like $550 billion. Now divide that by 10 years. This is a 10-year bill. That's $50 billion a year. We have a $22 trillion GDP. This is chicken feed. So what the members of Congress did, the Democrats, is they basically renewed the spending they were doing otherwise. They added a little bit, and they said, well, look, it's a big number, but it's a 10-year number, and it's not really like we're dramatically improving the infrastructure in our country. We're going to do some good, some new good, but it's not that big a deal because and had they presented it in a way that said, look, this is the best we can get out of the Republicans. It's not anything near what we need. It's only like a 0.5% increase per year uh, in the economy investment. We're way under investing still, but we're going to pass this today, but this is not a big money sink, and it's an investment to begin with. So let's not worry about it in terms of spending that is reckless, but now they're being painted as being reckless spenders because they spent $2 trillion. Anything in the trillion sounds scary, right? And then you got that.
They want to sound like they're doing the New Deal 2.0, don't they? They want to make the point that they're changing the direction of the country by
this is not the New Deal.
Pro-union, by public investments, by
I'm saying that they're just like the Trump administration engaged lots of propaganda, made themselves puff themselves up to make it sound like they're doing something useful, like that Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I did a very careful study with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta and other economists.
This is the Trump administration policy you're talking about.
2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
Yeah.
They said this enormous tax cut. We're really cutting taxes. If you look, the median tax cut was 1.5% of lifetime resources. It wasn't a huge thing. It was something, but 1.5%. If I say, Glenn, I'm going to cut your taxes over the rest of your life by 1.5%, are you going to party over that? Is that going to make your day? But they never advertise that fact. But that is actually the fact. Anybody can go to kotlikov.net, find the article that I wrote about what was a comparison of blue and red states. So just search for blue and red under articles. Actually read every single article I've got posted there and every column, because it'll take you a year or two, but you'll know everything I know.
A short course in economics from Larry Kotlikov. Yeah. If you got the time, it's to be recommended. But go ahead and make your point, Larry.
Well, I'm saying that what's really going on is not necessarily conveyed by what the press is saying about the situation, and the one underlying truth that we know is that the economy is a long-term proposition, and we have to look long-term. We have to think about the dynamic path the economy is on. And when you look at the CBO numbers through time, they look worse and worse. This fiscal gap, this gap in where's the money going to come to cover Social Security and Medicare as the population gets older. We have like 75 million baby boomers, almost all retired. They're all collecting Social Security, almost all now. Medicare. These big bills are coming due, and we're leaving them for our kids. And that's when countries fail through time, because what happens is that you take so much money from young people in the form of, well, let's say you either surreptitiously tax them by printing money and producing inflation. It's like a silent secret tax, a hidden tax, or you explicitly tax them, but you take resources from the young, give them to the old, then the young have nothing from which they can save. And therefore, our saving rate before COVID, our saving rate was like 3%. It used to be 15%. In the 1950s, it was, 13% in the 1950s. So we've gone with our national saving rate straight downhill, which is exactly what you would predict if you were to take money, transfer from young savers to give to old spenders, and do this over 7 decades, starting with Eisenhower. He was the one who dramatically jacked up Social Security. I'm not saying we don't need a Social Security system, a compulsory saving system, but we don't need to pay for our pensions on the back of our kids. Okay, each generation should cover its own bills, is my view. That was Jefferson's view, by the way, Thomas Jefferson. He was the first one to really worry publicly about the debt.
Well, hold on, I just want to ask this question about comparison to other nations, because you alluded to this earlier. You say that the European Central Bank publishes country by country data on the fiscal gap relative to GDP for the various member countries. The United States Treasury, Office of Management and Budget, whatever, won't do this. You do it on the back of your own envelope over there at kotlikov.net. What are you learning? How does the U.S. differ from other countries? Why does the U.S. differ from other countries? What are the implications of the fact that the U.S. is a relative outlier amongst wealthy countries in its relative magnitude of its fiscal gap?
Well, first of all, so it's not the European Central Bank, it's the European Union, and they have something called the European Council. And the publication, if you search for S2 indicator, and you go to like page 70, you'll find the S2 ratio. It's basically the ratio of what share of GDP are you short every year for the rest of time to cover the fiscal, to close the fiscal gap. In our country, for our country, it's about 8 percentage points of GDP. That's a huge number.
Did you say 80?
8 percentage points.
Oh, 8%.
Now,
Okay.
all of Social Security outlays, all of Social Security benefit payments are around 4 percentage points. So it's like 2 Social Security programs. So that's the sense in which
That's the gap. That's how much our obligations exceed our capacity to meet.
through time. And now, if you look for Germany, it's about 3 percentage points of GDP. If you look at Italy, Italy has a very large official debt, but they have very low off-the-book debts. Most of our debts are off the books, like the obligation to pay me Social Security benefits. I started collecting this year. I'm 70. I waited till 70. I'm collecting a check every month. That's an obligation that's not part of the official government debt because it was just classified as a transfer payment to me rather than a IOU to me. For most of our debts, about $7 out of $8 worth of debt, a fiscal gap is off the books, of obligations are off the books. So why don't we do it in our country? Why do these other countries do these calculations? Because those other countries have responsible leaders. They have responsible citizens. If you go to New Zealand, I went to New Zealand to do a gig with the Treasury of New Zealand. They asked me to be a fellow there for 10 days and give talks around the country. So I get there, I land at the airport, I take a taxi to Wellington, to the hotel. It's a beautiful country, lovely people. And I start hearing this fight on the radio between, it's a talk show. And both the radio talk show host and the person they're shouting. It wasn't really a fight. They were both shouting the same thing. How outrageous it was that the pension superannuation fund, which is their Social Security fund system, was like 1% underfunded. They were outraged. The new report had just come out that morning, and they had this absolutely trivially small shortfall, the fiscal gap in that program. Whereas we have a fiscal gap in Social Security, according to the trustees report that just came out a couple months ago, that's $59 trillion. Our official debt is about $22 trillion.
Right.
Our Social Security unfunded liability in table 6F1 of the trustees report, everybody can Google 2021 US, Social Security trustees report, and then go to tables Roman 6F1, and you'll see this number 59 trillion. And then go look at the size of the official debt, according to the CBO, that's in the hands of the public. It's 22 trillion. This is off the books debt. And we're not including, the obligations to keep funding the military, blah, 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 and blah.
Why isn't the obvious implication of the situation you described that I can predict that in a certain number of years, the government is going to renege on its promises and ex post facto adjust to reality its capacity to meet smaller obligations than those that it has announced? Well, why can't they simply do that? There's nothing to keep a Congress from changing the benefit plan. Right.
Well, I think we will renege on our debt. We are reneging on our government debt in real time. As you and I speak, prices are going up. So the $22 trillion of official government debt that's outstanding is being watered down. It's nominal debt.
Okay.
By 6%.
By inflation.
It was just watered down by 6%. So one of the things that Ratner got wrong and that Summers got wrong in their recent articles is that they're not realizing that this is a form of fiscal policy running inflation, and that you make money, governments make money by making money. When they make money and it leads to prices going up, they water down the real value of the debt. Right after World War II, we had a 25% inflation when they took off price controls. So during World War II, we sold all these government bonds. We promised to pay back these coupon payments. Prices go up by 25% in, I think it's 1945, 25%. And that reduces the real value instantaneously by a quarter of the outstanding government debt that was all racked up during World War II. So this is actually a fiscally, inflation is a fiscally conservative thing. Here, Ratner's writing about this huge, enormous spending spree by Biden. And then in the same breath, he says it's 550 billion new in infrastructure spending. Isn't that enormous? It's minor, it's trivial. You divide it by 10 years, it's 50 billion a year. It's nothing, 55, but this is the disconnect. This is the problem I have with these guys.
No,
they're writing to write. They're not writing to teach.
Okay, that's them. But among these economists, aren't they with you kind of hawkish on the inflation question relative to, I don't know, Joe Stiglitz or Paul Krugman, who might be saying, let's not worry about it. Build Back Better is the best thing since sliced bread?
Well, Krugman's got, my major differences with him. They're different, but a lot of economists don't necessarily see inflation as a tax, as actually fiscally conservative move to be raising. Look, if we ran a 20% inflation this year, we would reduce the value of the official government debt by 20%, by a fifth. Now, the problem is for our country, we have all these other off-the-book debts that are indexed to inflation that you can't actually get out from under by running inflation. So ultimately, inflation isn't a very good way of raising real revenues, because everybody's Social Security is going to be adjusted every year based on the COLA. So governments that are going broke try in the short run to make some extra money by making money, but then inflation takes off, and then the public starts understanding that they're getting taxed. And then Glenn, you're saying, well, okay, so ultimately this will get fixed up. We'll understand we got a problem and we'll adjust things. What will we do? We'll cut benefits. We're not going to cut benefits of the elderly. They're too strong a political force. We'll try and raise taxes on the young even more. Well, at some point, the young will do what the young did in Ecuador when tax rates got up to 70%. They left Ecuador. They moved to Spain. 500,000 of them did. Uruguay. It's not Ecuador. Uruguay. The history of Uruguay. Because I was actually there and talked to them about what went on there. So you can only get so. And so the other thing that people need to understand is this dynamic. When a country when you take from the young as much as you can, and there's a limit, you can only take every penny they earn to give away to some older person. When you take that money and they cannot save it, then through time, your country is poorer in terms of its ownership of wealth. But it might have a lot of GDP, it might not have a lot of output, because other countries are coming and investing in your country. They're bringing their wealth to work in your country, but you actually are poor. You're working for think about a Caribbean island.
The Chinese, Larry, the Chinese.
We're working for the Chinese. The Chinese have like a 30% saving rate. We have a 3% saving rate, national saving rate. That's exactly. Think about, go to a Caribbean island, look at all the capital there and the hotels and so forth. The people are dirt poor. They have no wealth. There's a lot of capital there. It's all owned by foreigners. That's where we're heading as a country. We're heading to second-rate status.
Okay. Let me ask you something else. I'm old enough to remember guys like Alan Greenspan, Paul Volcker.
Yeah.
And they loom in my mind as a young economist watching the economic policy debate unfold as hawkish, kind of severe, strict central banker, inflation fighting sons of bitches. It sounds like we need a couple of those guys. Is Jerome Powell that kind of guy? I mean, is Janet Yellen that kind of guy? Pardon the, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So part of what I'm trying to convey is that this whole dynamic is one of expectations of what gets into people's mind. And so far, the Fed, in recent decades, the Fed has been very successful in persuading people that we're going to have very low inflation, that if we're printing a lot of money now, we'll reduce it in the future. We have lots of ways to do it. It's all very obscure. Their books are honest, but they're hard to, you can't necessarily see how much they're printing for the president's lunch because they're engaging in so many transactions that make it very opaque. I can't break it out. Nobody can, to tell you the truth. You kind of see it when you see it. You see it when the prices go up. And the prices can go up when it gets into people's mind. They can go up even more when it gets into everybody's mind that prices are going up. Therefore, I got to raise my price and everything. So you can lose control. So you're absolutely right that there's this psychological element here that's very important. And Greenspan was great in controlling the psychology. Powell, I think, is pretty good at it. I think Janet Yellen's pretty good at it. They've got most people convinced we've got bottlenecks, supply side chain issues, and we're not going to have long-term inflation because the long-term inflation nominal bond rate on treasuries, I just looked yesterday, is 2%. If you invest in a U.S. Treasury, put $100,000 or $10,000 in a U.S. Treasury bill bond, 30 years later, you're going to earn 2%, 200. Well, what's 2% of $10,000? It's $200 a year, right? I got that right?
2% of $30,000.
No, $10,000.
2% of
$200 a year.
$10,000 to $200.
Yeah, you're going to get $200 for you, Glenn Lowry, to today or tomorrow. Go and buy a $10,000 Treasury bond from Treasury Direct, from the U.S. government. They're going to promise to pay you for the next 30 years $200, and everybody seems to think that that's a reasonable investment. That inflation is not going to be 6% a year. It's going to be 6% just this year, but next year it's going to go down to nothing. They've got that in their mind. Otherwise, the bond market would not be.
They'd have to think that. Otherwise, they require a bigger interest payment promise from the Fed.
So I want to tell your viewers here that you have to be out of your mind to be buying long-term bonds, either corporate bonds or government bonds, yielding these very low rates because the risk of inflation is so high, in my view. So I want to warn people away from that. I want to warn people from buying anything that's coming at you like an annuity, like you go to an insurance company, you put down some money and you get a stream of income that continues until you die. That's not adjusted for inflation. You can get
well, if people follow your advice, the price of these securities is going to fall, denominated in nominal terms, and that means interest rates are going to rise, which is going to make it hard to invest, and it's going to put a brake on the economy, and so we should expect more unemployment and so forth. Do you want to see a recession in order to quell the inflation fires?
Well, our economy historically has done very well with prices declining over many years. It's done very well with prices rising. If prices are rising, let's say every year at 6%, but everybody knows that, and everybody's getting a raise, and everything's being adjusted. The tax system, and our tax system is not fully indexed by a mile, and Social Security benefit kind of thresholds beyond which you're taxed on your Social Security benefit. Everything's adjusting properly for inflation, which it's not. Then we can live with higher inflation. It's where people are not kind of expecting it, and then they get socked. They invested 2%, and the inflation rate turns out to be 6% or 10%, and they get wiped out. That's the big problem. Inflation is like an unexpected tax. It's something coming at you from right field.
Now, didn't the late Marty Feldstein argue along these lines as to why indexing should be more widely practiced in financial
Marty
transactions?
Feldstein, my thesis director and good friend, passed away a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But he was a brilliant economist, former chairman of Council of Economic Advisors, and
Right.
he started so many different fields in economics, health economics and unemployment, economics of unemployment, and economics of the art market, and also he worked on the interaction of inflation and taxation. He should have gotten the Nobel Prize, I think, because he started so many subfields, but he probably passed away at a fairly young age. So anyway, now I lost your question.
The question was, wasn't he a big proponent of indexing for precisely the reasons that you are alluding to?
Yes, he was a big proponent, and a good chunk of our federal income tax is inflation index, but our state income taxes are not. They're periodically adjusted. And then you've got things like, think about the Medicare Part B premium where you retired. You and I are both working still. But where we retired, we go on to Medicare and pay probably Medicare Part B premium if we weren't. Well, we would have to no matter what Medicare plan we chose. There's a tax schedule. It's a premium schedule. It's no different from an income tax schedule. If your income 2 years in the past goes like $1 higher than some threshold, bingo, you get hit with an extra $800 in Medicare Part B premiums for that year. So it's like 4 thresholds. None of these are indexed for inflation. There's a whole bunch of things that the Republicans put in and the Democrats put in without anybody knowing or talking about it publicly or acknowledging it that aren't indexed that lead to a higher tax burden. So what Feldstein was kind of warning against is actually very much still in there in the federal fiscal system and very much in the state fiscal system. One of the things Ratner was saying, which was interesting, I don't want to be too tough on these guys because they do come up with some interesting facts. But he was talking about how good the inflation was for state revenues because their brackets aren't indexed for inflation. If you think about California, it's got a bunch of brackets. I think it's got several brackets. It goes up to 13% top tax rate.
Let me just explain to people that we're talking about progressive state income taxation, where you pay a higher fraction of your income if your income is in a higher income bracket. But as inflation causes everybody's income to go up with prices and their real earnings have not changed, they are being triggered at higher proportionate tax rates simply by the fact that the brackets are nominally and not relatively
fixed,
designated.
Yeah, absolutely right. So these things that Marty warned about are definitely happening still. So you could say quite clearly that Biden is running a very fiscally conservative policy. He's running there's a much more fiscally conservative policy this year than most people understand, that he's raised taxes, that he's lowered the national debt in real terms because of this inflation, that he's done a bunch of good things on the fiscal side. And Ratner was kind of getting at that a little bit. But what I would like to see Janet Yellen, Jerome Powell, the president, top economic advisors, all talking about publicly is the long-term trajectory of the country. Can we pay for what we're spending without printing money through time? That's the number one big question about inflation that needs to be publicly addressed by our officials. And it certainly was not addressed by Trump. He didn't understand anything about any of this stuff. The guy is an absolute...
But as things now stand, the answer to that question has to be no.
No, yeah, we're fiscally insolvent, so we are on an inflationary trajectory long-term. I think we economists, we refer to this as the fiscal theory of the price level. That prices, ultimately, if you're not going to pay for government spending with taxes, you're going to have to print money. That's basically the foundational kind of view these days of inflation. That that prices are going to have to adjust in order to water down these liabilities that the government has outstanding. So you make money by wiping out the government debt, for example. That's part of the fiscal theory of the price level. That prices will adjust not because there's more money necessarily transacting, which is like the old Milton Friedman view, but because things are going to adjust because people kind of anticipate higher money printing. So prices just jump up right now, and bingo, the real value of your debt goes down. So you get an immediate fiscal adjustment. So there's a major theory out there that economists have, been developing, been refining, called the fiscal theory of the price level. It's not the modern monetary theory. It's called the fiscal, which is just saying you got to pay for what the government spends some way or another. And if you're not going to do it through taxes, you're going to have to do it through printing money. And that's going to have implications for the whole path of prices, but also the current level, the initial level of prices might jump up.
You've made it clear that you're a Democrat, not a Republican.
No. I ran as an independent, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon, but I got the Obama did a great job, and Trump was an asshole sentiment from you. But in any case, I don't need to put a label on
Trump
you.
was
The
an
question I'm
asshole,
trying to ask
not because of his economic policy. Because his economic policy was not so bad or good. It was basically met very little. Nothing particularly good. Nothing particularly bad. We had to do a lot of good things, and he didn't do them. He's an asshole because he's an asshole.
Yeah. Okay. What I'm trying to ask you, though, is do you see anybody active in American politics today who you think understands the kind of stuff that you're talking about and could provide the national leadership that we need to get serious about dealing with our indebtedness?
I really can't, Joe Manchin, I think he is in the pocket of the energy, the fossil fuel industry. So I have major difficulties with him on climate.
For that reason, not because of his fiscal conservatism.
He is talking about it, but he's also got it all screwed up. He looks at this inflation. He says it's being, we can't spend this money, the extra $50 billion on infrastructure per year. And it's causing inflation, and therefore, this is we're going to cause more. He doesn't get the fact that we've actually just made money by printing money, by having inflation, that we've actually generated real revenues for the government. But he is at least, sounding like a mature adult, like somebody who cares about his grandchildren, about somebody who cares about how we're going to pay for all these bills. Do we want another entitlement program if we can't pay for the current ones? If you look at the trustees report, so screwed. So I guess, Manchin might be my favorite of this entire group, but I think there are some other senators on both sides of the aisle that are grown-ups. Senator Thune, Senator Wyden. Yeah, these are people. Tim Penny. No, that's the wrong name. I'm blanking. Anyway, is there anybody who's going to, come forward to run against Biden or against Trump, who I would love to see run? I don't see that happening.
Well, maybe we'll have to do it ourselves, Larry.
Do you want to be the president, or do you want to be the vice president on our ticket?
I think I'll be the president if I have a choice.
I think you should be president.
Lowry and Kotlikov, 2028 or 2024.
Let's be old enough. You're the better looking.
Yeah, I'm old enough for sure.
You'll be the best looking candidates, and you're the better looking. So we should definitely be on the top of the ticket. And let's do it. When are we going to announce? When will we announce? Let's announce on the Glenn Show at some point.
Okay. A future Glenn Show. That was Larry Kotlikov we've been talking to for the last hour. He's professor at Boston University, my old friend, economist extraordinaire. Kotlikov.net. KOTLIKOFF. Thanks, Larry.
Hey, always fun.
Yeah, it was. Talk to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.